All right, is everyone ready? I see people online. All right, welcome everybody to the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments. This is the Water Quality Management Committee meeting. It's December 12th, 2024. It's 9:01 a.m. Who do we have online here to make sure we have a quorum? Do you want to do a roll call for us?
Sure, I'm happy to. So I just looking at the names, I would feel confident to say we have a quorum. Well, I'll just go in the order that we see them online, starting with Allie.
Hi, good morning. This is Allie Shook. I'm the director of the Fountain Creek Watershed District. I believe this is my first meeting, so I'm just here to listen in.
Angie.
Hi everyone, Angie Martell with Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments. Apologies for not being there in person myself. I am sick and trying to not get everyone else sick, but glad to see everyone.
Connie.
Hello, this is Connie King. I have my own law firm here in Colorado Springs, and I represent 4 members of AFCURE.
Brandon, we're just doing introductions.
Hey, this is Brandon Bernard. I'm Operations Manager for Security, Water, and Sanitation District.
JD. And JD, if you're talking, oh, there you go.
There. Yeah, JD Shivers with Woodman Hills Metro District. I'm the Director of Water.
Jim.
Jim Heckman with Fountain Sanitation District in Lower Fountain Metro.
Roger.
Good morning. I'm Roger Sams. I'm with GMS Consulting Engineers that work with several of the folks represented on the committee.
Roy.
Roy Heald, Security, Water, and Sanitation Districts, and I likewise apologize for not being there in person to keep you company, Jonathan. Hopefully next month. So I feel bad about not being there.
You should.
Yeah, I do.
Wally.
How you doing? How you doing?
Wally Eves, Director of Wastewater, Woodman Hills.
And Mr. Chair, that's everyone who's online.
Thank you. We've had a couple people join us here. Go ahead and do an intro.
Yep, I'm Kevin Brown, Cherokee Metro District.
Thanks, Kevin. And I'm Jonathan Moore with Fountain Sanitation District in Lower Fountain. I am the chairman of the Water Quality Management Committee. I know I told Jim Heckman that hey, last time we met, we all said we're going to meet in person. So I raced up here, broke every speeding law. Yeah, but no.
That's good to know.
Yeah, no. Oh, Jim's still online. Sorry. Just kidding. All right. Any changes to the agenda? I believe we do have a quorum. As I've gone through the list here really quick. So can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Thanks, Wally. Thanks, Jim. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Right.
Hearing none. Thank you. All right. Item number 3, public comments. I don't see anybody from the public here, so unless any members have any comments they'd like to make, any questions? Hearing none. Discussion items. Angie, do you have anything under discussion items? I do not, unless somebody else does. Hearing none.
Sorry, I believe there should be things under discussion items. Are we not seeing the same agenda?
We are. There's a presentation and some other things.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't know if there was a broad.
Okay, right.
Broad, sorry. My mic is kind of blocking that. Okay. All right. Item 4A is presentation on the state revolving fund. Sean, are you with us? All right, Sean, the floor is yours.
Is this on? Yeah, I'm Sean Oliver with CDPHE, project manager in the State Revolving Fund program. I also brought Austin Reichel, a special guest, to help present some of the SRF program, and I'm going to turn it over to him to start off the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to be presenting in front of everybody here today. This is going to be for the State Revolving Fund, the Colorado State Revolving Fund. We are a low interest loan program, and we finance water and wastewater projects throughout the state of Colorado. And we also do some stormwater projects as well. And I don't know if you can see our graphic here or not, but we're essentially that revolving fund where we get funding from the EPA. They call them capitalization grants. And we have two different sort of acts. We fund out of the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the other one is the Clean Water Act. And the program differences are for drinking water or clean water or sewer, that sort of stuff. Anyway, with our funding here, we received that from the federal capitalization grants, and sort of once we loan that out and then those funds are paid back into the program, we can loan those back out for other projects. So you see that revolving graphic with the I think the piggy bank there. Moving on here, the Colorado State Revolving Fund. We make up three partner agencies. The one is the Water Quality Control Division of Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So you just heard from Sean. He is with the Water Quality Control Division. And they are the primacy agency. They do a lot of the program administration. They also do technical review and advisory roles and handle some of the federal reporting. We at the Colorado Water Resources and Power Development Authority are essentially the bank of the program. We do the financial structures of the loans, and we'll monitor the loans for the loan covenants. Our board is the one who ultimately approves the loan when you come in through the state revolving fund. And then we'll be with you through the life of the loan until you're done with us. And then we also have a third partner. It's the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, or DOLA for short. They do a lot of the financial analysis, financial capacities. They also run our credit reports for us when they're presented to the Colorado Water Resources Power Development Authority Board. They also coordinate a lot of the funding and collaboration outreach that we do. So you'll hear from them from time to time too in our program. And then moving on here to the next slide, we have what we call our sort of base program for the state revolving fund. And that's what we've had for years and years. It's the drinking water revolving fund, and the wastewater, which is the water pollution control revolving fund. And those were created out of those two acts that were mentioned earlier. As of 2021, we did start hearing sort of more about this bipartisan infrastructure law, or bill funding for short. We did receive that funding, and it's supposed to go through 2026. And that's additional funding to fund some drinking water projects, some wastewater projects. What's new with bill is it sort of added funding for lead service lines. It also added funding for emerging contaminants such as PFAS, which I think Sean's going to talk about shortly here. And then we had some wastewater emerging contaminant also with that. Moving on here, our program structure is pretty much the same from when we had base and bill are the same with program structure wise. We have what we call a direct loan, and that's typically for loans that are 3 million or under. Anything that's above that is considered the leverage loan category, and we offer for loan terms up to 30 years. We can do 20 as well, just depending on your project and sort of the useful life of the project. We do offer the below market rates because we're mandated by our creation to be below market. And then on that leverage loan, ours is you'll get the AAA rated, whatever that rate is at the time of the bond sale rate on your bond. We offer a 15% subsidy on that, so you'll get 85% of whatever that AAA rated is on the day of the sale. And then eligible entities here on the screen, it's for Drinking Water Revolving Fund, it's local governments. We also do private non-for-profits, but those, they still have to be a public sort of water system, if you will. Private non-for-profits, though, are not eligible for our bill funding under the program. And then for Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund, that's just local governments. And then moving on here for our funding limits. Right now, we have some sort of caps in place, if you will, for maximum amount of money that can go to the project per entity. And right now, for drinking water, that's 30 million. And then on the wastewater side, it's 18 million. And then depending on which program you're in and whether you're a disadvantaged community, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, we do have some principal forgiveness available, or a lot of people can refer to it as grants as well, but we call it principal forgiveness. On the wastewater, or sorry, the drinking water side, we have between 1 and 3 million. And then on the wastewater side, we have up to $1 million, but that's for disadvantaged communities only. And then in the lead service line program, we have the 10 million there, and then emerging contaminants, you can receive up to the 30 million there that you see on the screen. I do want to mention this. This is a really good tool if you guys are interested to get signed up for. It's our State Revolving Fund newsletter, and it just comes out fairly often. I think we try to do this almost quarterly at this point, but you can get some updates on upcoming things with us. If there's any loan application cycles coming up or any funding availability news, or just in general news with the State Revolving Fund, if anything sort of changes, this is a really good thing to get to your email to sort of get those updates as quick as possible. Additionally, under the wastewater program, we offer a portion that's called a Green Project Reserve, and that's just basically for a project that meets certain green components. And if you do have that for your project, you could be eligible for a reduced interest rate under our program for the first 3 million of that request. And as I mentioned before, anything above 3 million sort of puts you in that leverage loan category. And then for disadvantaged communities, those folks could receive a reduced interest rate, could receive some principal forgiveness here, or grants, however you want to sort of classify that. A little bit more to dive in on the Green Project Reserve here, or GPR, since we love our acronyms at the state. Clean water projects only, so the Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund there. And this is, to qualify for this one, you'll have to fit some of these categories, either have some sort of green efficiency structure to it, a water efficiency, an energy efficiency, some environmental initiative activities. And then I think you can see on the screen here, green component costs, depending on if you're between 15 and 20% of the project, you're eligible for sort of a reduced interest rate. If you're greater than the components of 20% for that green project, you could potentially get a even lower interest rate on that. And now moving on to disadvantaged communities, we have some sort of eligibility to meet the disadvantaged communities criteria. Most folks in this sort of category have a population of about 10,000 or less, and they'll need to meet some of our factors when they come through the program. We have what we call some primary factors and some secondary factors. You can see those on your screen. So, if a certain threshold's met for the median household income and the median home value, you may qualify for the disadvantaged community program. If you're a disadvantaged community, you also could be eligible for some additional help. We do offer planning grants up to 10,000 with a 20% match. So you'll probably need expenses in about 12,500 to receive that full 10,000. But eligible entities are going to be those governmental entities, or in some cases, the private non-for-profits on the drinking water side. So, but this planning grant will help develop a project needs assessment, or it might be helpful to do sort of an environmental assessment depending on what's required for your project. We do also offer design and engineering grants up to 300,000. and that's for those governmental entities who meet disadvantaged community status and have that approved project needs assessment, which Sean will talk more about that shortly here. Under our base program, moving on here, loan forgiveness. So availability varies. We have seen significant demand on the program, and especially with bill funding coming in, we've also seen even more demand. So availability of sort of principal forgiveness will depend on caps and maxes in place at the time and how many folks we have coming in for the loan application at the time. And then eligibility amount is determined at loan application time. And most of those requests can range anywhere from 20 to 80% of the loan requests, with a maximum of $1 million, which we saw on the wastewater side. And then moving on to the bipartisan infrastructure law, again, here the funding. So we have those sort of separations of pots of funding we talked about earlier. Moving to our forgiveness distribution here. You can probably see this on your screen when it loads here in just a sec. You'll see there's some caps in place on the drinking water side. We have, depending on, excuse me, if you're a non-DAC, which you can still be bill eligible because bill criteria is a little different than the disadvantaged community criteria, you may be eligible to receive the 1.5 million cap on the non-disadvantaged community side of it. But if you're a disadvantaged community, you could receive up to 3 million on the drinking water side. And then for the wastewater side, you've got that $1 million cap, and this is only for disadvantaged communities. So bill eligibility on that, you'll meet that if you're a disadvantaged community. And then lead service line, we have that $10 million cap, which we talked about earlier. So non-DAC borrowers can only access that pot once, but DAC borrowers can go back and access it again if they need to. And then emerging contaminants, we have that $30 million cap that you could receive loan forgiveness on. And then wastewater emerging contaminants, that's 100% principal forgiveness if you're coming in for that with us. Bill grant / loan forgiveness and eligibility, you'll have to meet base program disadvantaged community criteria, projects address lead or emerging contaminants, and then demographic criteria, socioeconomic factors will be looked at as well, and you can see some of those on your screen here. And then base and bill program supplemental funding eligible projects. This is where I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to Sean, and we'll be available for questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Austin. Yeah, again, we'll have a Q&A at the end. I think we'll have a couple of minutes, hopefully, to address any questions that might come in that you might have from both our presentations. So as Austin mentioned, we have this new bill funding program along with our base program. And with the bill program, supplemental funding, and our base program, the general fund is similar in eligibility types of projects. For the drinking water side, it's pretty broad in terms of eligibility. We have treatment, distribution line work, source storage, consolidation is also an eligible project. So with this broad eligibility, we kind of like to look at what's not eligible. And so certain projects that aren't eligible are projects that are generally for growth. And we say growth, every project's going to have growth designed into their project. And so there's a certain threshold that we'll look at when you come through our program to make sure that that's not the primary factor of that project's scope. Is just for the growth aspect for new development or other growth aspects. And another one is fire flow protection. That is eligible, but if that's also the primary scope of the project, that would not be an eligible project for drinking water projects. And on the wastewater side, you can see it's vaguely the same project eligibilities, treatment, water conservation, collection systems, stormwater is on the clean water side. So We like to also look at the non-eligible types of projects, and again, that's growth related as well too on the wastewater side. Wastewater, we can fund a lot of things for wastewater. I think we can for clean water, we can fund for stormwater projects. We can fund street sweepers, trucks, stuff like that to go into any aspects to meet your permits, your water permit, clean water permit. So, and there is a good resource on here. They do need updating. They're from 2017 and 2016, but they're the EPA handbooks, eligibility handbooks. There's project specific examples in those for what's eligible and not eligible. So it's a good resource and one that we use too as well at the state. So to go to other pots of funding that also mentioned for bill funding is the lead service line project under the drinking water side. So to be eligible for this, there's certain types of eligibility. Identification of lead service lines is an eligible project scope. Planning and design for the removal of lead service lines. And then for the actual construction of the lead service line to be eligible, the whole service line from distribution line to the threshold of the house needs to be replaced during that project. Unfortunately, water meters are not eligible. So if you're replacing that service line up to the threshold and also want to replace the water meter, you'd have to have a different funding source or pay for that for yourself to replace those meters. Now, if you were to replace the meters, you could come into our base program or bill funded program under the other pot to pay for those meters. That's an eligible project as well. So you could lump the two funding sources together to do that lead service line and meter replacement project. So there's been some changes. I think in the past we were talking about if there was lead found in the distribution pipe that led to service line, that would be eligible. That's no longer eligible under this. It's only the lead service line that's replacement that's eligible under this project. And I think goosenecks were also eligible at one point, but that's also no longer eligible. So the whole line has to be found to be made of lead to be eligible for this. And then moving on to the emerging contaminants project, and both the drinking water and wastewater emerging contaminant pots of funds are fairly similar when it comes to eligibility and ineligibility for a project, for a scope to come in. So the primary focus to be eligible for this pot of funds needs to be address the emerging contaminants like PFAS or PFOS, any other emerging contaminant that's not on the contaminants list and doesn't have an MCL for it, a maximum contaminant limit, that would be eligible. So manganese, it would be an eligible emerging contaminant to come in for. And that's something we would look at when you go through our project program process. We kind of look at it, the scope throughout the phase, and I'll get into this in a little bit on what the process looks like. But that's usually, we look at it at the project needs assessment stage to make sure that this is primarily addressing these emerging contaminants. And again, you can lump this emerging contaminant pot of funds with the base or bill supplemental funds portion. If you're doing treatment plant upgrades, but you need a filter or mechanics to address the manganese or PFAS. So what this pot of funds in that scope would go to fund the filter itself and the installation of that filter, and then nothing else. So you could carve out that scope of that water treatment plant upgrades. And then non-eligible projects for both drinking water and wastewater are, contaminants that are already regulated by the Clean Water Act and Drinking Water Act. And so now I'll shift over to our process, and both base and bill supplemental funding follow the same SRF process, and they all have the same program requirements as well too. So here's a snapshot of kind of our general major milestones of the SRF program. And I saw some entities on the call already that have come in for an SRF loan before and can probably talk to the process and how it kind of changes sometimes from project to project. So not all scopes and projects are the same. But generally, we like to say to go from the eligibility survey to construction takes anywhere from 12 to 18 months. And that's working through the whole timeline of from pre-qualification to construction. And that's closing on the loan and starting construction. So the very first step in our program, which is pretty important, is getting on the intended use plan, and that's filling out the eligibility survey every year on CIOS. And that's even more important next year if you have not filled it out, if you want to get bill funding. So the eligibility survey coming out in 2025 will be the last one for you to fill out to be eligible for bill funding if you have not for 2026, which is the last year we have bill funding available. The eligibility survey is not going away, but it's going to be the last time that if you're not on the list, to get on the list to be eligible for that pot of funds. And we usually open that up every year in June. And then if you've already filled it out before, you'll need to fill it out again every year to maintain eligibility for SRF funds. Once you're on the list or you're planning on getting on the list, the IUP list, the next step would be submitting that pre-qualification form. And that's the springboard to really start our process. And when you fill that out and submit it through CIOS again, you'll be assigned a project manager and a project team with all the partner agencies that will help assist you through our process and meet each milestone. So each milestone has its own unique review process. At the pre-qualification stage is more preliminary, and that's where you have, you have a general scope of your project. Your project cost is kind of locked in. You have a good estimate. You don't need to have a consultant engineer, but that does help at that stage if you want to move quickly along our process. And we'll sit down with you and talk through your project and give you notes, what our review is, what the next steps are, if you need a design report or if you can self-certify your project, you'll generally know at that point too. And one other thing that we've started prioritizing projects, and I'll get into that in a second. We will do a preliminary score of your project and give you so we can prioritize, kind of generally know when you can come in for funding, because we've changed our loan application windows, and I have a slide for that. So we'll help you guide on kind of a project timeline at that point too. But that timeline also depends on when you can get us the next step, and that's a project needs assessment. And that's a more in-depth review of the project. Your scope is locked in at that point. Your final project cost it's almost locked in. I don't want to say locked in because, as you go to bid, prices change, loan application project costs can change. But we generally like to have a final cost, close to a final cost of that project needs assessment with that locked in scope. And you'll need a consulting engineer at that point too, or an engineer on board to stamp that P&A. It's for submittal for our review. Once you have that review process can take about 3 months, depending on the scope. If you have a limited scope where it's just distribution line, pretty straightforward, we can probably review that around 2 months, depending on the time of year when you submit it and kind of our project load. But we generally say 2 months, 2 to 4 months for every project needs assessment review, depending on the scope, to get turned around and approved. Once you have that approved, it opens you up for submitting a loan application. So you can submit a loan application at depending on where you prioritize and if you have enough points on our open windows, which I think there's a slide for it, and that's January, February, April, June, October, November, and September. Sorry, and the 5th of every month there. But again, some of those you'll have to prioritize. I'll get into that in a second. And after loan application, it takes about 5 to 6 weeks to take before our board for approval. And after approval, you'll work with Austin or the Power Authority to execute the loan. And while you're trying to execute on loan, you can go to bid on the project and the construction. So every project has an environmental review. Prior to construction, your project needs to receive environmental clearance. We lock in that final environmental determination, which is either an environmental assessment or a categorical exclusion. And there's also an environmental impact statement. I have not had any of those, but that's possible. That's a possible outcome. That can add a lot of time to the project to complete. But that final environmental determination is locked in at the project needs assessment. And again, environmental clearance will be needed prior to construction, shovels in the ground. And your design review, we work with our engineering section is in-house, so you'll know what will be needed for that design review at the project needs assessment. And that's, either design report or self-certification. You'll work with your project manager to help you know what's needed in that and kind of help you get that timeline of review turned around as soon as we can. Again, eligibility survey is the very first step, very important to becoming eligible for funds through our program. And that's run through our CIOS website. And it doesn't obligate you to come in for funding. No step other than executing the loan are you obligated to come in. You can go through the whole process up to loan execution. And if you have a better funding source elsewhere, you can go with that. And when you're not locked in with us. Now, if you do receive a D&E grant, which Austin said, we do typically like projects to receive those to come in for a loan. But, we're not beholding you to any projects to come in for that. And that D&E grant's done after P&A approval to help you get the design for the project. So as I mentioned, the new application process, we've had to prioritize due to capacity issues with bill funding and base funded projects. So we will give you a preliminary priority points at the project pre-qualification stage. So starting next year, we have open windows in January and February of January 5th and February 5th. Those are open to anyone that's already in our process and that has a project already being approval. You don't have to be a DAC. You don't have to meet our thresholds to apply for those. After that, all the windows you have to have a priority point threshold for drinking water of 110 points or more, or wastewater side 100 points or more. And if you're deemed a disadvantaged community, you automatically you can apply at any application window throughout the year. And the priority points are finalized at the project needs assessment. So you will know at the project needs assessment stage which windows you can apply for. But we'll have a general idea at that pre-qualification stage. But things do change from pre-qualification to P&A, so we do review at that P&A stage, and you'll know which window will fit your project. And again, here's a list of all the 7 loan application deadlines and which ones are open So as Austin mentioned, we do have a direct and leverage loans. So direct loans, anything under 3 million, you can apply for both January and February if you don't meet those priority points or DAC. January is the only leverage loan cycles if you don't meet those thresholds for the year. June is the next leverage loan application, and that's only open to projects that meet that priority points threshold or disadvantaged communities. And then starting at April 5th, they're all limited after that throughout the year. So I guess the next, if you haven't started our process and you don't meet those priority points or DAC, I guess the next window would be January of 2026 for your project to meet a loan application if you don't meet any of the priority points or DAC status. And again, when can my project apply? And as I mentioned, projects at above the priority point threshold, DACs automatically, all the windows are open. Projects that request only lead service line funds, you can apply at any window. Projects that request only emerging contaminants funds, all windows are open. And then if you qualify for that GPR loan, and that's the only loan that you're receiving, all the windows are open. Now, if you're mixing pots and you don't meet those priority points or DAC status and you're mixing pots, then you have to go into that open cycle of loans. And then that's it. We have some good resources for you on our water quality control glue website. It has a flow chart basically of all the steps that were mentioned here, the documentations that's needed, has a link to our CEOS page, our engineering sections on that website, our permit sections on that website. So it's a really valuable resource, and we've worked hard to make it flow as easily as we can. And of course, you can reach out to project managers, myself, or there's a list of project managers. You can reach out to Austin or anyone at the Power Authority. Desi Santerre is it's a great resource at DOLA. If you're thinking about a project coming in, we can try to sit down with you and see where you're at and if you're ready for that pre-qualification stage. Now we'll open it up for any questions that we have.
Thank you. Anybody have questions?
I have a couple questions. I think I saw some new funding from the EPA going to the SRF. Is that right, Sean?
That's somewhat correct. That's the bill funding that we received.
Okay.
And that link that you sent, that was just us receiving our annual CAP grant for bill funds. So we receive a CAP grant annually, as also mentioned, and that was part of I think our 2025 CAP grant. I'll let Austin.
We just recently received the 2024 CAP grant. Yep, thank you.
Great. Okay. Also, I think you're going to be having an SRF workshop in 2025. Is that right?
That's correct. We're going to have two. I think one would apply to this area. We're going to try to have one around the Springs, the 25 corridor. I think we may even try to, if Pikes Peak area council government's amenable, potentially have it here. Or I think there's a Douglas County Library that's also looking, but I think July 2025. The newsletter that Austin mentioned will send out the information on that. And if you're not signed up for our Stay Informed email blast, we'll send out information through that as well too. We're also having another workshop in Southwest Colorado, around in between probably Montrose and Durango, if anyone's interested in that. So those are the two in July that we're looking at.
Awesome. Last question. Do you think you could share these slides with me and I can send them out to the group?
Absolutely. Yep. And on our water quality glue website, we have other presentations that we've done, webinars that we have on the website as well too, that might be a little bit more in depth, but I will definitely send you these slides and you can share it with everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Angie. Any other
This is Roy.
questions? Go ahead, Roy.
Yeah, Jonathan, this is Roy. I just want to make a comment. Good job, guys. Thanks for being here. And Austin, it's particularly good to see you.
Nice to see you.
All right, any other comments or questions? Oh, yes,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Karen Rowe. I'm a contract employee with PPACG. I'm the regional grant navigator for the state. So I help communities in Park Teller and El Paso County get federal grants under BIL or IIJA, same grant, same program, and the IRA. So I've been meeting with communities about their wastewater and their drinking water needs. And in relation to that, because I've worked on grants under different EPA or Bureau of Reclamation, federal, state, they all have a different website or definition of a disadvantaged community. So what's your data source for disadvantaged community? I saw under 10,000 or less, which can be a little different, right? So Fountain is a disadvantaged community on a federal level because they have sections that are disadvantaged, but they probably wouldn't qualify as a disadvantaged community under this program.
That's a great question. And we primarily use the American Community Survey data to do our disadvantaged community criteria. And they're about 5 years behind on that data. So we're going to get new data soon on, I believe it's 2023 finally. So typically have that 5-year window. So we'll be looking at, excuse me, we'll be looking at the 2019 through like 2023 data soon. And we'll update our criteria. We typically do that around March of each year at our board meeting. So
but you also have the criteria of 10,000 people or less.
Right. That's
so
the
that's
primary
a little
factor.
different.
Yes.
Okay. Where do I find that list, or do I just email you and say what community is this community a disadvantaged community?
Our partner agency, one of them, DOLA, that we mentioned, or Desi Santier, that's a really good resource to look on their website and try to do that. We also have it on our website, but there's sort of a disadvantaged community map that you can go in and kind of click around and see if this particular area is looking at those primary factors or not for the disadvantaged community. And we do have some areas that we look at block group data and some different data to try to see if there's better data on them for disadvantaged community, because not necessarily every area fits into that mold of that whole community.
Right. And so what, another question along those lines in terms of community is some water districts aren't technically a city or a town. Can they still be considered a disadvantaged community, or like a unincorporated part of a county like Bailey or Florissant? Can those be communities?
We typically look at block groups for the districts and those types of things because they're not necessarily that community, right? So we can sort of try to hone in on a smaller area, but our data is usually only as good as survey data too that's filled out, because they're asking for survey data from the folks in the area to try to come to sort of a conclusion on what this area makeup looks like.
Okay, so along those lines, so like, let's just say Florissant as a water district, they only have 95 tap users, but can they be considered a disadvantaged community if they do qualify, or is it have to be a city or town?
It'll depend on the pre-qual when they come in. Typically, we do take a look right at the pre-qual, whether if they have disadvantaged community status or not. And at that time, we determine whether they're eligible for a planning grant, which we mentioned to do the project needs assessment or the environmental assessment if they need to do that to come through our program.
Okay. So it should be easy to find for me, for example, just to look at Park Teller and El Paso County and see who is in your system for that?
It would be good to take a look at that ahead of time, but so DOLA typically runs the analysis for the disadvantaged community status,
Okay.
and they'll run that at the pre-qualification if they're planning on coming into our program for funding.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Karen. Any other comments?
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I think that was very, very clear, and I appreciate your questions because that leads into a couple of questions I had. So is there a standing list of which communities are defined as disadvantaged, or is that determined every time an application is made?
It's determined every time an application comes in, and we reevaluate disadvantaged community status at the loan application time too. So just because they weren't disadvantaged at the pre-qual doesn't mean they won't be disadvantaged later.
Sure. Or the project needs assessment.
Or the project needs
Yeah,
assessment.
there's three
yeah.
different phases that
Yeah.
disadvantage is assessed.
All right. And my second question is about the emerging contaminants funding. I thought I saw that was somehow connected to the federal funding that's expiring in 2026.
That is correct. Yes, and yeah, that's bill funded, and then
Right.
it also has its own additional requirements as well. But I didn't get into this.
Yeah. So on bill funding projects, does that come with the federal purchasing requirements and oversight?
No, because where they're given to the states.
Okay.
There are requirements, federal requirements involved, and I did not have that slide in here. So American Iron and Steel, I think Davis Bacon are requirements, depending on if it's a wastewater, drinking water projects. If it's a wastewater project, A&E procurement is a requirement for wastewater projects, and that's qualifications based for your engineer. And then every project we have to meet bidding criteria, 30 days notice, our state revolving funds specifications. All this you'll have when you submit that when you submit a pre-qualification, you'll get the whole water hose, fire hose of information. And that's why I'm here, and Austin's here to help assist with those requirements, make sure your project's meeting them. But those are federal requirements that are involved. And if you're an equivalency project, there is Build America, Buy America as well too.
Okay. And a final question on the emerging contaminants. So if we have a project that's going to design and construction in 2027 or 2028, will there be funding available? Is there any state plan to add funding up to those higher limits that you showed in the presentation, or after 2026 we're kind of on our own?
We don't know yet. They could potentially continue funding projects after 2026. That'll be up to the United States Congress whether they want to do that or not. As far as the state level, so I'll have Sean talk a little bit more about that. And what we're getting right now from the federal government, it's up to them if they want to continue another bill-like program after 2026.
Yeah, and we certainly have our base program that's going to be here ideally for years to come. We also have additional grants through WIN funding that we offer. I don't know when that application time period is. I think, again, if you go on our website, we have a grants page that has emerging contaminants grant through WIN funding, which is a little bit more strenuous, or not strenuous, but has a lot more regulations because it's a grant and timelines and stuff. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and you can certainly co-fund projects. We co-fund a lot of projects through the state revolving fund with grants, the WIN funding, water quality improvement fund that we offer as well. DOLA has an energy impact grant that we have a lot of projects that co-fund through that. USDA is also another one. So if you're looking at co-funding, we're amendable to all sources. Just make sure we line up requirements and timelines is what we try to do the best. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Any other comments? I have a question. What's the competition for this money? I mean, how much money do you guys have left over every year?
Competition, I'll hit that one first. It's very, very tough. It's very tight. There's a lot of competition on this money. A lot of people want the money. A lot of projects want the money. And that's why we're having to go to the prioritization so we can sort of spread so we can spread it out a little bit more. We want to try to hit as many communities as possible. So, and then as far as funding left over, that's a really hard question to answer because we don't always know what that number is because we'll get new funding coming in and then we're kind of a crystal ball program with that. We hear from projects, they might come in for our, say, January 5th loan application. We can plan out, hey, this is the amount of projects we think are coming in for this price, but maybe only 3 out of the 5 that said they're coming in are coming in. And we may have more funding at that point. We just don't know. It's our best guess. Really, we do have a project sort of pipeline we try to look at and say, all right, who's telling us they're coming in and who's not, but we don't force projects to come in. If they come in, they come in. We'll try to fund them as much as possible. If they don't, then we may have some more to fund other projects at a later time.
And that's why that eligibility survey is important too. It typically asks you what your 20-year planning period is and cost. So that's important that we get that so we can put it in our intended use plan for the amount of potential project costs that we can send to Congress too, and they can look at it and see how much funding need is here in the state as well too. So that's why it's important for that eligibility survey to be filled out.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments from the group? Hearing none. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming down.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, next item on the agenda, 4B, the 208 plan items for update. Angie.
Yeah, so this is going to be a longer conversation in the coming months. This is more just to introduce that our plan has our 208 plan is going to be updated in 2025. And these are just minor updates. And by minor updates, I mean, these are updates that we as a group can do internally. We have a very tiny amount of funding from CDPHE to take this on in 2025. We don't have a consultant. We're not doing a full-blown plan update. And so with that, we had sort of a work plan from CDPHE to look at these proposed items for update, which is that A through G right there. These also need to take into account looking at environmental justice concerns. As we work through them, we'll look at that as well. So these are proposed from CDPHE, but as a group, we need to evaluate whether these items need to be updated or not. So for example, has anything changed? Is new data even available? How are we using the plan? Or do you reference the plan to look at, say, policies, or is the plan, the way it's written, working for you? So that site application review process language, if someone were to be referencing that to understand how to process a site application, we might say, well, there needs to be some clarity added here. So this list, this brief list, is proposed from CDPHE and a work plan that we worked out with them apparently in before I arrived. So I'll stop and see if anyone has any initial thoughts on these proposed items for the 2025 update, anything that they'd like to add, anything that stands out as initial questions or priorities for updating.
Angie, this is Wally. So the land use changes, I'm not sure that's really something we could predict. That's more at the county level.
Okay.
And Angie, this is Roger. The policies, is that intended to address policies of each individual discharger or utilities provider, or is that maybe policies how the area-wide water quality management agency reviews site apps or things like that. What does that policies bucket look like?
Right. It is kind of vague there. So in the 208 plan, there's a list of different sections have policies. We should have it in front of us here. I'll bring that next time. But maybe I can bring all the policies from the 208 plan to our next meeting, and we can look at the policies that are listed in there, and have a more informed discussion on what those policies are. But there are specific policies listed in the 208 plan.
Okay, yeah, because if those are items that any of the, say, the reviewing sub-regional management agencies need to have as a, say, a checklist when they're looking at some thing that's come before them to comment on, we probably need, I would agree, we need to probably vet those again, to see if they're still applicable.
Right. I'll pull the policy section, and we can at least look at it as a group and see if it needs to be adjusted or not.
Okay. Then I presume the population projections, that would kind of go to your staff there. And all of that, most of that kind of stems from your work in transportation, does it not?
We do have population projections data that we do for other work on our long range plan and such. So that's, but I'm unclear if that's, we do that for our planning area, and I think that this is population projections for each individual watershed. So I think it'll be different data sets and different ways of looking at the data than we currently look at it for our long range plans.
Okay. Well, and certainly at the state level, there's been a lot of work on the site application review process, and I think that's useful to have another reference here, maybe consolidated, that each of the management agencies can have at hand when they're asked to comment on somebody's application. So, thank you.
Thanks, Rogers. Anybody else have any questions for Angie? Hearing none. All right. Well, thank you for that update, Angie.
So yeah, no, I'll leave it there, but we'll bring this back in January to have more detailed discussion on how we're gonna move forward with these individual updates.
All right. Sounds good. All right, we're moving on the agenda here under informational items 5A, introduction. Karen Rowe is in the house. Karen.
Hi, I'll reintroduce myself. Karen Rowe. I'm familiar with the area, and I've been the Pikes Peak area grant navigator since March of this year. Previous to this, in my other lifetime, I was with Colorado Department of Transportation. However, my background is civil engineering, and so I'm getting more involved in the water and wastewater, or wastewater and drinking water realm with all the grants. So I've been meeting with a lot of the communities and water districts around Pikes Peak region. But as regional grant navigator, I like to keep informed on this, but I also want to make sure that you guys know of resources that are available if you need to go for grants at the federal level. So this is a lot of state information, and it does have some federal funds, but there are other federal grants to pursue, and there's other resources. So through the state, their goal is to get as much of this federal money from the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. And so with that, they provide a local match assistance. So that's, if you go to the DOLA website and type in LOMA, the state does have ways that they can help fund any match that you have for federal grants. Now, I know with a lot of the water grants, it's 50-50. They don't have, like a $3 million match, but you can apply and see what they say if you do have a federal grant to go after. And also you can reach out to me and just see if that's a possibility. The other thing they have, if you do have one of these grants, and again, you can work with me anytime. I'll provide my contact information, but it's kro@ppacg.org. Is they do have grant writing services available also. Again, it takes some time and it needs to be approved. But if you don't have the resources or the money to apply for some of these water quality grants, then you can apply with the state and see if they can help you. And again, it has to be not the state grants, but it has to be on the federal level. So even though the state is getting BIL programmed money, you'd have to be applying for a grant under the IIJA, also called BIL. So different agencies call it different things. There's also something that I'll follow up and send out, but there's other grants available that help set up programs that are more longer term to work with communities on their drinking water and or wastewater or other grant needs. So one recently formed is called the Mountain and Plains Thriving Communities Collaborative. And it's through the EPA, but it serves North and South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah. But they provide technical resources also to help you with grants. So sometimes it's a smaller grant, and they can help you out with different resources you might need, cost estimates, grant writing people. And they have a long-term relationship with the communities to help them with various grants. So it's not just drinking water or wastewater. It could be anything that the communities might need. And then I don't know how many of these communities here have used it. I know I've referred a few communities, and Cripple Creek has started it, but there's the water technical assistance through the EPA. And I saw a webinar on that, and they also help communities with water grants, various kinds. And if depending on the community and whether they have the capacity or the money, they can provide some design for some of these water projects too. So those are things that I share with the communities. I know people's times are limited, but there's lots of resources out there. So you can reach out to me. I'll make sure to share some of these other resources if you have any questions. And I just encourage this group to keep sharing information with each other of what has been successful, and what's helped them go through the process. So I think now is the time, to really get that help with that water infrastructure investment now through next few years at least. I'll see if there's any questions. Yeah, Angie.
I want to add to Karen here. So Karen joined us in September and gave a presentation to this group. That's recorded and we can share it if anyone wants to see that. We can also have Karen present on a regular sort of, quarterly basis or something like that, if that would be helpful. And I also encourage you to reach out to Karen and just let her know what your project needs and your funding needs are, because she's keeping an eye out on everyone's needs and looking for funding opportunities for whatever your needs are. So even if you don't know what grants are out there available, what funding opportunities, Karen can be a resource to say, hey, I have this thing. Is there anything available? And she's very good at keeping her eyes peeled for different opportunities. So just encourage you to reach out and just introduce yourself. And I can also share her contact info with anyone if you need it.
Good, thank you. Any questions for Karen from the group? Hearing none. All right, thanks, Karen. All right, next item, CDPHE's Water Quality Control Division 2025 Assistant Grant. Angie, who's presenting? Any information on that?
I just wanted to mention this briefly. I'm signed up for the newsletter that Sean and the State Revolving Fund sends out, and they sent this out recently, so I just wanted to share with the group. It's a technical assistance opportunity, and I just wanted to mention it because it's due coming up soon, December 23rd, for any sort of operational or administrative improvements, grants up to $25,000. It's a really easy application process that this item is in your packet of information for this meeting, and you can click on that, click here to apply. It'll take you straight to the application. You can also reach out to me if you have any questions, and I can help you work through it. We also have contacts at I can help get you in contact with people at CDPHE if you have other specific questions. But just wanted to point this out if anyone has a need for it. So just a brief mention there is all.
Thank you, Angie. Any questions on the assistant grant from anybody? Hearing none. Okay.
Jonathan, maybe just one comment. I think just for clarity, this is only applicable to water systems, drinking water systems, water supply systems. It does not applicable or is not applicable to wastewater systems.
Yeah, thank you.
That seems a little biased, Roger, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I think what half of us on the committee here indeed have some interest in the water systems as well, but the other half have only got dirty water on our minds. So.
That's right. All right, thank you. All right, moving on. Item number 6, member entity announcements. Anybody have any announcements? The floor is open. I'm looking around this room, but there's kind of a skeleton crew here. So anybody online? None, all right. You think of anything, let us know. Okay, item 7A, upcoming PPACG meeting schedule. Angie, did you send out some calendar invites? I'm trying to remember. I get so many this time of year for next year.
Yeah, I had sent out a reschedule for this meeting because of the holidays. And then Jared sends out our ongoing meeting. Jared, I'm not sure if you sent that out for our recurring meetings for 2025.
So we're in the process of all those 10 different committees. So we've got 2 of the 10 so far.
Okay, so that'll be coming out. Unless anyone has any thoughts on that, we'll just keep it at the same time and place. Does that work for everyone?
Yeah, works for me.
Yep.
And we'll take that as a yes for now.
Yeah, okay. Awesome. All right, thank you, Angie. Anything else anybody wants to bring up before we adjourn? Hearing none, excuse me. Is there a motion to adjourn?
This is Wally. I'll make
Roy,
a
so
motion to
moved.
adjourn.
All right.
I'll second
Roy,
whoever.
I think it was a motion by Wally and a second by Roy. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none. Thank you, everybody, and Merry Christmas.
Thanks, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
And you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jonathan. Same to you.